Hello, my name is Alejandro Sandoval, and I am the president of IMEF in Juarez. And this is a summary of the press conference that had place January 14th, led by Ms. Gabriela Gutierrez Mora, who is our national president, and she was there with Roberto Arrechederra Pacheco, president of the announcement of IMEF in this year, Victor Manuel Herrera, president of the Economic Studies Committee, and our general CEO, Gerardo González Anaya. The main reasoning of this survey is that it didn't change that much compared to the last month's survey. The macroeconomic instance and projections for this year is that our GDP will grow 1%, inflation 4%, when our goal by the country is 3%, so it's 100 extra basis points. Our public deficit, the debt, compared to GDP, 3.9%, decreasing, but not reaching the goal yet. The monetary policy, 8.5%, along the decrease on inflation. Employment, formal employment, 300,000 employees or positions in the whole year, absolute change. The exchange rate, 21 pesos per dollar, and the current account, 1%. For 2026, we expect GDP to grow 1.8%, inflation 3.8%, a very small decrease of 20 basis points. Public debt compared to GDP, 3.5%, a small decrease also. Monetary policy, 7.5%. Formal employment, 400,000 positions. Exchange rate, 21 pesos, 10 cents per dollar, a little depreciation. And the current account, 1%. Now, it is understood that these variables are projected with the historical data up to January 9th when the survey was made. But we have to analyze the reasons that could shift and put in a worse situation these variables. The main element in the risk balance is the beginning of the Trump administration within the framework of threats that he has made specifically against Mexico. And the worst of them is the declaration of Mexican drug cartels as terrorist organizations, not because the presumption of violations of human rights, but specifically of the implementation of the Executive Order 13224, along the regulation of foreign assets control, which will imply a restriction to access to the international flows of funds through banking. You know, in Mexico, we have to make a transfer, the space system, which implies that we can make in a few minutes a transfer, an electronic transfer from one account in one bank to another account in another bank. We can do the same internationally with the SWIFT code or the AVA system. If this declaration of terrorist organization to the Mexican drug cartels is made, it could imply the implementation of this asset control, foreign asset control system and the executive order that I mentioned. And this will block the banking system of Mexico along the worldwide system. That will be terrible. The second threat that is important to consider is the tariff threat. This implies charging fees for the exports of Mexico in the customs of the U.S. The problem with it is that in the immediate resolution will imply the increase of the cost of our products in the U.S., making us not competitive. But it could be worse, because if Mexico retaliates with tariffs, then we will import or keep importing products from the US at a very higher cost, implying a potential recession and potential inflation. And the other aspect that is a threat and also a risk is the deportation or massive deportation of illegal immigrants, which will imply a conflict to our urban and weak urban infrastructure, mainly in the northern cities of Mexico, but also in the rest of the country. So these three elements are not necessarily the best things that could occur. Also, we have in Mexico the public policy over the housing agency that we have under the labor law. We as patrons have to pay a little proportion of the daily salary of an employee to support a savings account specifically dedicated to housing for them to buy a house. The Infonavit is the name. Nowadays is organized by an agent of the government and an agent of the private sector and an agent of the unions, labor unions. The government wants to eliminate most of the representations of the private sector and the unions and let alone the government operate this entity. This entity is basically a financial entity under financial regulation. They want to extend its operations to build the houses for the employees and get rid of the financial regulation. So both elements make weaker the organization, setting aside the private sector representation and the labor union representation makes things worse, but also setting aside the financial regulation and increasing the risks by entering into a business that they don't know how to do, which is building houses. And finally, along the Mexico plan, which is a new plan issued by the federal government, we consider that it has ambitious goals that could stimulate investment, even private investment, but we need to overview the public policies to develop whatever is needed to make the implementation fully reached. Finally, one of the different elements of these conferences this year will be to be considering an explanation of the different chapters that include the IMEF pronouncement or exposure, main letter of exposure or of, let's say, support to the federal government along public policy recommendations from these Financial Executives Institute. Well, this document will be integrated by 5 chapters made by people from IMEF and other specialists. And the main chapters include financial education and its importance, fundamental concepts of financial education, strategies and tools for financial education on people, financial education as a tool for economic inclusion, and the conclusion will face how to reach better economic inclusion and development through financial education. So we will be talking about these different chapters in the following months. So let's keep in touch. Thank you very much for your attention.